Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, your source of common sense commentary on salient current events. There are not many people who feel like the current environment is ideal for themselves, those around them, or society overall. The United States is in need of change, and the question is which of the two presidential candidates is best suited to deliver the right change. In the past episode, we discussed the economic issues we are facing and the policy ideas that are supposedly going to fix them. Now, we are going to move our conversation to democracy, foreign policy, domestic policy, and the effectiveness of the current leadership. So let us begin our discussion.
Welcome. Let us start our conversation by discussing the leadership issue that clearly exists. The polling clearly shows that people want a different direction from the status quo. On almost every major issue, people are not satisfied with the public policy in place. The leadership in place that is being rejected is that of not only Joe Biden, but Kamala Harris as well. She is the vice president and has held pivotal roles in the administration. Not one of them led to a positive outcome. Yet, the Kamala Harris position is that she would not change any decision made by Biden. That should be a troubling indictment of her judgment. And it either reflects our clear disconnect with the broader public than her heavily fringe progressive base, or she played a great part in the pain that many people are feeling. Which is it?
Two things can be right at the same time. Politicians want to shape how you, the voters, see events, issues, and topics. Therefore, they will try to tell you the sky is not blue if it benefits their narrative. Give alternative storylines for what you see clear as day. And sometimes people will not see past their ideological talking points. I do think that many Democrat politicians amongst the progressive wing of the party actually look at the current situation and reflect upon it positively. These individuals frequently believe that the problem is with the messaging, not the actual actions and decisions. A direct counter to the public that feels the exact direct opposite. There are some who will question the tactic of connecting the existing mess to Kamala Harris. And those who hold that view need to consider a couple things. Despite what the normal narrative is, the vice presidency does play a key role in enacting the agenda of the president. And for a president that is viewed as clearly not working as hard as his predecessors, there must be someone making those decisions for him. One can be considerate to their current boss while laying out where there would be a difference in approach. You are not the same person and were added to the ticket to broaden the appeal. So there should exist some differences in approach. Especially when there are clear and obvious failures. If people actually listen to Kamala, she says a lot of nonsense. I am still interested in what a person can look at in the current situation, economy, and environment and believe things are going good overall. Yes, people can still do well in a bad economy, just like some will do poorly in a good economy. But what are the good signs? Biden and Harris came into office with a world generally at peace, came into office with as orderly of a border than any recent point in our nation's history. Yet, their public policy ideas and leadership style led to the situations where our enemies do not feel deterred and attracted a flood of illegal migrants crossing into our communities, depleting resources. Now, this is more of an indictment on judgment, but judgment is important for a leader. While there is much said about the perceived chaotic nature of Trump, his term did not really show any chaotic approaches in governance, whereas the Biden-Harris era seemed like a rudderless ship that continues to hit a wall. Their lack of judgment continues to allow problems to grow as they fail to craft any reasonable solution. Obedience to an ideology is more important for them than delivering results for the broader public. Also, there has to be something that defines success in order to be a good leader, and there has not been a single issue that Kamala Harris has been on the side of success.
There are a number of things that she could have stated in a manner that is still respectful to Biden, but shows a clear difference in opinion. For instance, she could have said, given what we know now, she would have had a better plan for the Afghanistan withdrawal that clearly failed and left Americans and our allies in great harm. She could have stated that she would have taken her duties as border czar more seriously than she did debating the title. The foreign policy and national security failures that existed during the Biden-Harris administration can be directly tied to her because she went to Europe to address the situation, before going to the border, a duty she had before that assignment. But her visit to the region did not do much to deter the invasion, nor did it really serve any purpose than a photo op. Should American voters be concerned over the foreign policy that may exist under a Harris administration if she wins?
During the debate, Kamala Harris made the claim and outright lie that no American member of the armed forces lost their life or were in a war zone during the Biden-Harris administration. In contrast, there were no hot global crises like those occurring in Ukraine and the Middle East during the Trump era. A clear contrast. I believe that it is important that a person serving as commander-in-chief has resolve, judgment, and moral character to lead in these difficult moments. In Joe Biden, He served half his life in the federal government, but his experience did not lead to resolve or sound judgment on the big issues in the foreign policy arena. Harris has far less experience and seems to lack sound judgment. The biggest fear that Americans should have regarding Kamala Harris is that America will be drawn into a larger global conflict. My biggest concern is whether our leaders will succumb to calls for American troops serving in Ukraine, because at some point, that will be the request by Ukrainian President Zelensky. Given the trajectory of troop availability, that is a reasonable concern. So do we have a leader that helps resolve the situation or one that continues to subsidize a losing war to the point that it escalates? That is the dichotomy voters face on the topic of foreign policy. The narrative that any question of our Ukraine policy is support for Russia is petulant politics. There is real concern with the ability for Ukraine to prevail in this conflict and a clear need to avoid an escalation that would lead us into World War III. But we have a shared interest in protecting the sovereignty of Ukraine and containing the Russian threat, if they are. And do we stand with an ally that staunchly supports our interests or kowtowing to the emotional whims of those who cause death and terror in the region? America needs to stand solidly with Israel. Now, no one wants to see war and destruction. But, if the Palestinian people truly want a war-free community, push out Hamas and turn them in. They are not. They willfully allowed a terrorist organization free range and are now suffering the consequences of their choice. Can we trust a person like Kamala Harris who has shown that she is unable to tell the difference between the good side and the bad side, as progressives always sympathize with the fringe and the wrongdoers? She struggles to differentiate the two sides domestically, and it will have far graver consequences globally without a Biden there to temper bad judgment.
Americans want safer communities to live in and the ability to work in crime-free areas. They want to be able to operate a business without violence or the rising cost of theft and other petty crimes. People want to use public transportation without being assaulted, attacked, or harassed in any way. People do not want to continue to see buses pull up in the middle of the night releasing illegals into their communities, where their tax dollars fund housing and living needs of non-citizens while their schools deteriorate and community needs of tax-paying citizens go unfunded. The current response is to simply not enforce the laws. Conveniently, crime looks lower if you do not charge or arrest the criminals. The progressive solution that put the criminal interest above the victims and the community, and progressives claim everyone else caters to the fringe and extreme part of society? Kamala Harris was an attorney general and prosecutor, but that does not mean she was good at her job. Being elected in a reliably blue city and state is not really hard. You just need a pulse and a Democratic registration. Larry Krasner and Alvin Braggs are, or were at one point, prosecutors, and neither would be considered good judges of character. As a prosecutor, she should be able to identify when crimes are committed and not to put criminals back out on the street. Yet, we know she has been heavily involved in bailing out suspected criminals during the summer of love and probably still now. That is not good judgment.
Consider your own work environment. If you do not have the right plan to deliver the desired results, then what is the common approach people use to make it look like they are doing their job? They usually will try to manage the numbers and stats to make it look better or tell a story that is not really representative of the complete data set. That is what many of the progressive district attorneys are doing. They are obsessing about the stats and how crime stats look rather than holding those who commit crime accountable. Crime stats tell an unfortunate story that minority groups will have far more run-ins with law enforcement because they make up more than their fair share of communities susceptible to crime. So district attorneys want to revise this by using identity to determine prosecutions. So you can show a completely different picture and narrative to the public. You can claim that crime is down because arrests are down. Crime is down because the jail population is lower. But what has not reduced or decreased? The number of victims. Unfortunately for these supposed leaders, people are generally not as naive as you assume them to be. You do not need a degree from an elite Ivy League institution to see the increases in crime across the board, higher frequency in violence, and overall unsafe feeling in most areas nowadays. Because criminals feel like they are not going to be prosecuted. And some feel like people will not call the cops because of their identity. Then you see businesses move unwilling to serve high crime areas. High-worth individuals no longer want to associate with high crime areas. Yet, these same supposed leaders will blame them for wanting to leave for safer and better managed communities. The first and foremost requirement of our political leaders is providing for the safety and security of our communities. And progressives are clearly failing across the board. Most places with a progressive at the helm are struggling with crime. So just because you held the title of prosecutor, district attorney, or attorney general, the general public is not going to assume you are good at your job. When you put more criminals back on the street than you hold accountable, you may not be a good prosecutor and clearly do not show good judgment. Asking whether a victim is alright is completely hollow when you let the person who victimized them back out there to continue to foster fear in them. That is not sound judgment. Titles cannot make up for bad performance on the job. Communities do need more policing to deter crime and to respond to calls faster. People committing these crimes need to be removed from society until they understand the harm they are doing and actually atone and repay society. I think rational people want to see fair justice, but want to see criminals held accountable and crime reduced. Personally, my concern is more for the victims and communities than the plight of the criminal committing these crimes. Many people face similar adversity in life and do not choose the path of crime and violence. The days of hug a criminal need to come to an abrupt end.
The continued trend with being way too sympathetic to the plight of the terrorists than the victims of those terrorists. Being sympathetic to the ills of domestic criminals rather than those impacted by the actions and choices of those criminals. And greater interests in the needs and wants of those crossing our border illegally than the communities being harmed by illegal immigration and the victims of illegal immigrants who come here to escape prosecution in their home nations and continue to live the same criminal life. Why should anyone think that Americans can trust the party and person who played a great role in growing the problem and incentivizing it to solve it when they have no real interest in doing so? Are we supposed to be that naive?
There is a reality that not every crime is punished. Not every evildoer sees justice, but the standard should be to work towards complete accountability. There should never be an acceptable level of crime in any civilized society. We can appreciate when crime is actually lowered, but we should expect that it is going to continue going down and the numbers are not being manipulated. The only border security that progressives have been forced to accept is that there needs to be some quota of illegals and then the border closes for the day, only to return to their normal the next day. That is border security in their eyes, but not any rational American. I am sure there are many people in the groups of illegals that are simply trying to live a better life than what is available in their homeland. But I do not place that concern over the security needs of our nation, communities, and people. If these individuals are actually as good, then why not use the legal system? Some do not want to wait is the excuse. But what would make someone not able to wait? Is it knowing there is a detectable crime on their record? Are they escaping accountability in their homeland? We cannot assume the worst, but we cannot expect the best either. We need real border security and for immigrants to follow the legal channel. Do not let criminals cut the line. Do not let people indebted to cartels or other human traffickers to continue to get taxpayer dollars while people who actually help our society and economy have to wait. That is not fair. Why should criminal acts of any form lead to government benefits? You get what you reward, and it is no wonder why so many people continue to flood our borders.
Finally, let us talk about the sanctity of our American democracy. Both sides of the political spectrum make claims about our democracy being under threat. Because of the actions of January 6, Democrats obsess over attempting to connect Trump with the anger of those in the crowds. Yet, there was not the same level of anger from these same people for those people who destroyed cities across America in 2016, and their party fabricating a Russian hoax narrative about a stolen election, far worse than the 2020 stolen election narrative. At the same time, Republicans highlight the efforts Democrats have gone to silence political opponents by pressuring social media companies to censor conservatives and protect narratives during the pandemic. Now, the use of lawfare to attack political opponents is another threat to our democracy ushered in by the Democrats. How can we protect our democracy, and does it really need protecting?
I am not really a big fan of fabricated narratives that our democracy is under threat when there is no real threat. Our democracy is not under threat because of a candidate. And both sides do have some questionable decisions and actions that taint their opinion that they are the protector of our democracy. The biggest threat to our democracy is when people are not able to speak their minds and question the decisions of power brokers. Regardless of whether you agree with speech or oppose the view, the person should have the right to express it, and you have the right to counterspeak and deliver a retort. The effort by the Biden-Harris administration to work with communication platforms to limit speech and essentially censor society was the biggest threat to democracy in recent years. And when public institutions that are supposed to be apolitical start acting with political purpose, then that is harmful to our democracy. Changing how laws are enforced solely to prevent political opponents from running for office is a threat to our democracy. Labeling every opposing view as hate speech, misinformation, or disinformation can also be harmful to our democracy. Our democracy is the people, not the government class. Our democracy cannot be strengthened by limiting what can be said, who can say it, and what group matters. The traditional projection and deflection approach used by progressives in most aspects of policy debates is clear here. They will use an artificial concern for democracy to actually end our democracy as we know it. There are so many radical ideas being thrown out there under the guise of protecting our democracy when those ideas actually harm it or render it ineffective. Radical change is really meant for political purposes, not social benefits. For example, the call for an information czar to basically formally censor society. Do they really think people cannot see misinformation and disinformation? We do want honesty in our national discourse, but we do not want a slippery slope situation where one can use a convenient buzzword to censor and silence political opponents when the speech does not even fit the accusation. We have seen that all too often. Let us stop pretending that our democracy is in a constant state of danger. That is not rational. As long as our voices are here, our democracy will continue to live on. In closing, I do think this election is about two different visions. Do we want a society where we are judged on merit, ambition, and character, or one where our identity and demographics is the deciding factor? Do we want a society where the good actually matters and we are not asked to see the bright side of those harming our communities and doubt those who contribute to the positive aspects of society? Do we want real opportunity, or one where there are strings attached and the requirement to become dependent on a politician that wants you to be a reliable vote? Do we want global peace and the strength to defend our homeland rather than appeasing and subsidizing our enemies in the hope that maybe they will stop behaving contrary to the global good? Elections have costs, consequences, and scarce opportunity. We know who both candidates are and what their records show. We know who has a proven record and who is trying to make it up as she goes. You do not have to like everything about a candidate personally. You will never meaningfully know them. The smartest choice is to select the one that will be most effective and has the proven track record. There is a clear choice here. Thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review.
Thank you for experiencing this featured presentation of the Christopher Peter Review. Please continue to visit www.crcreview.com for more. Please subscribe on YouTube and YouTube Music. Your viewership and support is greatly appreciated.